Welcome to episode 9 of the Today I Am Sober podcast with your host, Liz W. Today I invite you to pause. And who better to pause with than Isabelle Griffith, who's going to share with us her journey to learning to pause. If you'd like to share with Isabelle and I what you think of this episode and this conversation, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can contact us via our social media accounts. All the links are in the show notes. And if you want to press pause, Isabelle has a marvellous free download all about the 5 steps you can take to pause and turn your inner critic into an ally. So download that now. Enjoy the show. Today on the show, I'm speaking to the rather delicious Isabelle Griffith. Now, Isabelle is the founder of Light Up and Thrive. She believes that we all have the potential to expand, grow, and transform our minds and our lives. She's a yoga teacher and a mindfulness and emotional well-being coach. And she's on a path to create a more meaningful and mindful life. And she's going to invite us on that journey today. She's going to share her wisdom, insight, and experiences to help us as we create more light into our lives. Now, Isabelle is also a podcast host, and I've been binge listening to it. It's called The Mindful Path. We'll make sure that the link is in the show notes. And one of the things that really intrigued me about Isabelle is how her energy just feels so calming. And I was stressing out this morning, and luckily I popped the podcast on loudspeaker on my iPhone whilst I was in the bath, and I just took some time to just pause. So Isabelle is joining me today, and we're going to talk about pausing, not posing, pausing, P-A-U-S-I-N-G, and Isabelle is going to share with us how we can pause in our own lives, because let's face it, life's busy enough as it is. So enough of me prattling on. Isabelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for the great introduction. I don't think anyone has ever described me as being delicious, but I like it.
You are absolutely delicious, my lovely.
So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. One of the things that I'd really love us to start by talking about is how as women we can trust ourselves.
Yeah, so I think for me, trusting yourself is a journey. And we were talking a little bit about it before we started recording the podcast. But, it starts again with pressing pause. I think a lot of us in our lives today feel quite disconnected from the world around us, from each other, from ourselves. We rush through life at the speed of light. I feel like we're rushing through life with a bit of a tunnel vision, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that's the elusive moment where we'll be happy forever. And in living life like that, we miss out on all the moments of happiness that are laying along the path as we rush past them. So I think, pressing pause is the foundation for everything else. It's really the foundation for building self-trust. It's the foundation for being intentional about who you want to be. It's the foundation to taking in the good. And I can talk more about that later. But really, when good things happen, if we don't pause and really enjoy them, our brain doesn't take them in. So it's the foundation for everything. And it's the foundation for building self-trust. When I work with my clients on self-trust, it always starts with self-awareness. And that self-awareness needs to begin with learning to press pause. I don't know if you can relate at all, but I think when we are in this rush energy, constantly running through life, or when we're going through a really difficult time, we often feel disconnected from ourselves to such an extent that we don't even know what we're feeling. we don't know what's going on for us, and to get to a point where we're trusting ourselves, we need to know ourselves first. We need to take these small moments with ourselves to just be, and to ask ourselves for a few seconds, what's going on for me in this moment. For me, that's where it starts. And then on that, on that foundation, we start building greater awareness about where am I in my life, what's going on for me in my life, why am I feeling perhaps confused, stuck, lost. Then we start looking at your inner kindness, developing a kinder, more compassionate inner voice, because most of us are run by an inner tyrant, constantly, beating ourselves up in our minds. And then from there, we move to developing greater self-esteem and self-worth. And then we move to developing more inner power, inner resilience. And that's when we feel like we can trust ourselves, because we know ourselves deeply. We accept ourselves wholeheartedly. And we've got the inner resilience to deal with whatever life brings us. And so we feel that deeply rooted sense of trust. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, complete sense. And I'm thinking, gosh, that's a lot of work. Well, where do I even start?
And that's where it begins. It's the pause, transformation takes time, and we can't go from being the rushed person with the blinkers on that doesn't really see what's around, and isn't quite able to enjoy life, even though you might be ticking all the boxes, to suddenly being open and seeing the joy in all the little things in an instant. It's really a path, but I think the beauty is in the journey too. Every step of the way you sort of peel layers and you uncover more of who you are, and there's joy in that. But that's why I started with talking about pressing pause, because to me, if you've got to start somewhere, pressing pause is the place. Pressing pause is the moment where you reconnect with yourself, even for an instant. And that's where you start developing that relationship with yourself, getting to know yourself a little bit better. And then you feel that you can respond to life rather than being in that reactive energy of rushing constantly. You can start to be more intentional about who you are. It's where the choice resides, the choice of how am I going to approach this moment. If I just stop and take a few deep breaths and just say to myself, what's going on for me right now, and what would I need to resource myself for the next step? It's a very different energy you bring to your life and to the way it unfolds, rather than just rushing through it and pushing through the discomfort. And if you feel sick, or if you feel like you're really low energy, you just push it under the carpet and carry on, and that's, over time, it erodes your connection with yourself, and your ability to feel, your ability to be in life, and to really experience it fully, because we only experience life through our own feelings and emotions and thoughts. And if we totally disconnect it from all of that, we can't experience life in any meaningful way.
It's funny, as you were talking, I was taken back to a moment that I had when I was in rehab. And it was early in the morning. It must have been about 6:30. I was outside in the smoking area, and it was an autumn day, and I was on my own. I was sober for the first time in a very long time. It was unusual. It was highly unusual to be awake at that time of day. Never mind, sat outside on my own with my thoughts, observing what was going on. And I think for me, that was one of the first moments that I actually kind of just stopped. And for the first time ever, I had this realization that the world did not revolve around me. It carried on turning regardless. I was not the master of the universe, that the sun would still come up and set without any intervention from me, because I thought I was in charge of the world. And that the leaves falling, because it was autumn, they were beautiful colours and they were really pretty. And I noticed the smell. And looking back now, I know that was a mindful moment, but it's so visually and emotionally evocative in my memory. I can recall that moment just like that, at the click of her fingers. And it takes me back to that feeling of calm, of it's going to be okay, Liz. It's going to be okay. And it's interesting, as you were talking, that was over 6 years ago, that moment. And whilst I've recalled it just now, I've forgotten that moment a lot of times in terms of, I've forgotten that I can go back to that, the stopping, the pausing, the reconnecting with where am I right now in this moment. And I love the fact that you're giving me permission to do that. In fact, you're actively encouraging me to say, Liz, stop, let's just pause.
Yeah.
We do get, as women, we do get caught up in the madness
Everything.
and everything, and especially at this time of year, we're, as when this episode comes out, it will be just before Thanksgiving for our American friends, coming up to the end of November. If anyone listening's got children and they're at school, particularly primary school, oh my goodness, the madness of Christmas in primary schools. There's fundraisers, Christmas fairs, there's Christmas lunches. Their calendar is children's calendars at Christmas is absolutely packed, and we have to remember all these different things that they've got going on. It's highly stressful. Add into that, where are we going for Christmas? Whose house are we at? Who's coming? What are we going to eat? Oh, so and so's coming, but they don't like turkey. What are we going to do? There's a whole plethora of stuff that comes up at this time of year. So I love that you're saying that we press pause, and that analogy of being in a tunnel and not focusing on the light at the end, but noticing the beauty of the things around us in the moment. I think is so important. But
I know it sounds a little bit cliche, and it's, déjà vu, and it's really difficult to comprehend or to see the power of that when you don't experience it. But I think once you do, it's really powerful. And I don't know, I mean, that moment you're describing, I imagine it lasted a few seconds. And I think what's really telling is, you said, I knew in that moment that I'd be okay. And that's self-trust. It's just being able to step away a little bit and to observe your experience, and to know that you've got, Tara Brach refers to it as your true refuge, which for some can be just being with yourself. And again, I think it's so powerful, but we've got to distinguish between being on your own and being with yourself. And I think they're two very different things.
Ooh, so what's the difference then, being on your own and being with yourself?
Well, I think, a lot of us will think of, for example, self-care as being perhaps having a moment to yourself, being by yourself. And that's great. And you might be doing all sorts of things by yourself, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are with yourself. So what I would say is, being with yourself is really, again, tuning in, even if it's for a few breaths, and just getting into the habit of asking, what's going on for me in this moment? And if meditation isn't something that you enjoy doing, it might be journaling, or it might just be going for a walk and being present in that experience and noticing how you feel. Like you said, just noticing the leaves, and wow, the color is so vibrant, or the smell, or the squelching of your feet, because that's when we can enjoy life. And going back to the tunnel, there are cracks in the walls of the tunnel where the light pours through, but if you run past them, you can't see them. And life is only a succession of moments, and if you're not in the moment, it goes past, and then there's never another one quite like it. You just miss life. So it's in that pause, you reconnect with yourself. You start to have more of a knowledge of what's going on for me and what do I need. You start to, it's self-care, but at a much deeper level. And self-care can start with very simple things like lighting a candle or reading a book, but I think spending those few moments to just go, what's going on for me and what do I need, is being with yourself. And that's the deeper sense of the pose, is really just being with yourself and your experience, because that's where the resourcing comes from. that's where you stop the rushing and the madness. And, it's almost, like in those movies where everything moves past the character, but they stand still. It's a little bit like that, I think.
Okay, so we press pause.
Mm-hmm.
How long should we stop for, Isabelle?
Well, you stop for whatever feels right for you. I think, again, pressing pause can take so many different shapes and sizes. I always talk about micro poses, mini poses, and then maxi poses. And micro pose can be you in the supermarket queue, and you just, for a few breaths, you just press pause and you just are with your breath. That's it. And you just notice your breath flowing in and out of your body. It's really calming. It may be you drinking your tea in the morning, and rather than just gulping it down, you feel the warmth of the cup in your hands. You really enjoy the taste in your mouth. You are in that experience. But it can also be taking a mini pause, maybe a walk, a yoga class, sitting on a bench and watching the world go by and really being with what you see. Or it can be a longer pause. You might choose to go on a creative course that really ignites your creative juices and gives you that joy. You might choose to go on a retreat. You might choose to go away for a couple of days. And, it's really, there's no rule to it. It's whatever works for you. But I think it's important that there's an element of being with yourself in that pose, even if it's only, if you're anxious, something is about to happen and you feel really anxious. It's feeling the soles of your feet on the ground and noticing that you are unconditionally supported by what's underneath you. It's taking your focus away from your mind and just wondering what's going on in my body. What am I feeling? It can take so many different shapes and sizes, and it doesn't have to be meditation. It doesn't have to be long. It can be in the shower, in the supermarket, as you pick up your children, as they're having a tantrum. Take yourself to the kitchen and just take 3 deep breaths, and then go back out again, feeling a bit more resourced, rather than in that, fight, flight, ready for combat, I'm gonna get them kind of energy.
Yeah, no, I could completely relate to the children thing. I've got a teenager at the moment. Deep joy.
Yeah. I have one as well, and I know what that's like. And you really need to take yourself out, and pause, because otherwise it's just a chain of reactions and reaction on top of reaction, and then we're left with, I feel really guilty now. I shouldn't have reacted that way. So that pause is just self-resourcing, calming ourselves down and grounding ourselves.
It's funny. One of the ways I still do it today, but I don't do it as much. When my head started to go a bit bonkers and a bit mental, and it's like in the film, what's rushing past me is actually my head, and I'm physically staying still, and my brain's running at 1,000 miles an hour. I'm catastrophizing. I'm stressing about I've got an email to send, and then of course I'm going to lose my job if I don't write the email correctly, or I'm going to offend somebody, and then I'm going to be homeless, and then the whole world comes to an end, all because of a single email. The way that I pause is that I use the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And the reason I love that is because it starts off by saying, give me the serenity, give me the peace. I need peace before I can accept the things I can't change. Because quite honestly, if I'm not peaceful, I can't even see what needs changing.
No.
Never mind discerning whether or not I can do something about it.
Yeah.
So, you talked about rooting your feet into the ground. And when I was in rehab, we did mindfulness, and she would have us walking around the room with bare feet, purposefully placing our feet. And I didn't personally get that. And had us eating
a raisin, probably.
A raisin. Yeah. It was.
It's always a raisin.
It's always a raisin, and I hate raisins.
I don't like them either.
Give me a raisin.
but it's very scripted, you know, and it doesn't have to be like that. It's very scripted, and I think it's finding what works for you, you know. Some of the, I mean, I'm a trained mindfulness teacher, so I've done the raisin and I've done the walking, the mindful walking, and I didn't resonate with all of it either. I think you just have to find what posing means to you. And like you said, it may be a prayer. It may be looking out of your window and just watching the clouds, you know, flow by for a moment. It might be, you know, maybe you have one of these stress balls and it's just pressing the hands and feeling how that feels. It can be anything. It's really not about what it is as much as it is about just stopping the sort of you know, the chain of events, the chain of thoughts, and just coming back to this moment. And I had a very, you know, the reason why I do what I do is because I had this moment that you're describing. I was sitting on the bench outside my house years ago, and I won't go into all the story that preceded that, but as I sat there, my mind was racing in all sorts of direction. I was sitting having a cup of tea, and it was a beautiful summer's day, and anyone passing by would have thought, oh look, this woman, isn't she lucky to be sitting in the middle of a working day with her tea? Isn't it quaint and beautiful? And actually in my mind, it was like my mind was at war with itself. It felt like a prison. It was so busy and full of judgment and, you know, as you said, projecting in the future and trying to control what was going on. It was almost unbearable. And I, you know, at that moment, I felt like I was broken in a million pieces and I didn't know how to move forward. And just being with myself, I'd not pressed pause. I'd not been with myself for years. And I found that sitting there and being forced to be with myself was impossible. I just wanted to escape. It was physically difficult to be with. And I didn't know where to go, because when it's in your mind, you can't go anywhere. And you know, that sense of learning to be with yourself is what led me to yoga and to mindfulness and to what I'm doing now. And I think it all starts with having even a few seconds where you can say a prayer or do something that gives you that peace for a few seconds. You can just be, you know, and then it gives you a little bit of resourcing, and then you move forward, and maybe next time it's a bit longer or it's different, or you explore something else, you know. But unless we pause, if I hadn't learned to pause, I would still be with all these thoughts. Probably I would have driven myself crazy. You know, I felt like I was going crazy. So I can completely relate to what you're saying. And I think it doesn't matter how you pose or what it is or what it looks like, as long as you find a way to get yourself out of your mind for a few moments and focus your awareness on something else and just be with that. And then little by little you build it up. But,
I love that. And I was so with you as you were sat on your bench, because I felt like that, you know, on the outside, you know, when I was drinking, I felt like on the outside my life looked great. Flash car, house, lovely child, great job, loads of money. Inside I was dying. You know, mentally, physically and emotionally, I was just bankrupt. And it's ironic, isn't it, that we never really know what's going on inside of someone else's life. And you said something earlier that really resonated with me about when we were talking about teenagers, about responding and reacting. And one of the things I've had to learn to do is to not react, because I can become quite volcanic when I react. And actually, you know, stopping and pausing before I actually respond. Now, sometimes people can say things, do things, I don't know if this is your experience, that just trigger some part of you inside. Boom! You know, there's no space for pause. It's hit you in that place, and it's just like reaction. But it's interesting, isn't it, that we're using different language to explain the same thing. Is that I'm using this, you know, prayer, stop, and you're saying just press pause. Now, for me, it's like a micro pause. You know, me saying the serenity prayer is like flicking a switch in my brain.
Yeah.
Say stop.
Yeah.
Don't react. Just hello. Just get back to you, Liz. Let's get
Mm-hmm.
some peace and some calm. And you're saying the same thing, but
Mm-hmm.
using different language,
Mm-hmm.
completely. But the outcome is the same.
Yeah, that's your pose. You know, your pose
Yeah.
is the prayer. That's your pose. That's what works for you, and that's great. And I think it's excuse me, it's really finding what it looks like for you. But with that, developing the habit of posing in those moments where your teenager is, you know, telling you, "Where is my skirt? You haven't," whatever they're saying. You know, with that being in the habit of just posing, you automatically react. It's the pose when you don't need it trains your brain to just respond, you know, to take the
Yeah.
poses when you need it, to stop when you need it. If you've never done it, and I used to be that person, and it's not that I'm perfect now, but I pause a lot more and I stop before I rush into things. I pause a lot more than I used to because I've trained my mind in just practicing stop. Things are going crazy. Just stop. Take a few breaths. For me, it's my breath. That's what works for me. And it's just, you know, recentering and just, it's not that bad. It's not that big a deal. And what am I making it mean about me? Because it's not about me. When my teenager is screaming about her skirt, it's about her and looking good for her friends or being in the right uniform for school, or, you know, and sometimes in that pose, when you do that prayer, you can have a glimpse of that's what's going on for her. You know, that's, and what she needs is not for me to come out and roar at her, but to say, I get it. I'm sorry, the skirt is not ready, and I know what it feels like, and, you know, let's figure out something, or but just from a place of calm. Again, it's not always going to be like that, but as much as we can, I think it transforms relationships. And then you're not left with feeling all guilty and shameful and, you know, oh, I'm such a bad mum, you know, all that voice inside our head that then comes back and says, you've done it wrong again. Maybe you don't have that voice.
Oh no, I have that voice.
I suddenly have it.
I tell you, my mum voice is not very nice in my head. My inner critic mum is not very nice. And we were you were alluding to that earlier about all the different voices in our head. Sometimes I've got a very negative committee in my head that's, you know, sometimes they're in charge of the show, and I have to stop and say, no, hold on. Stop now. That's not very nice. That's not very kind.
Yeah. And again, if you pause, you can move into that space of noticing and going, no, that is not what I'm choosing to follow. I don't, you know, that's not who I want to be. So I'm just going to pull the reins of the horses back and come back to a more compassionate voice, even the one that's in your mind.
Okay, so we've talked about the pausing, and what I've learned from you is that we find whatever works for you. You know, if the raisin eating doesn't work for you to pause, or the taking your shoes off and walking on the grass, that's okay. There's lots of different ways to pause. You know, have some fun, be a bit playful. I'm all about being a bit playful.
Yeah.
And find different techniques for just pausing.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned the clouds, you know, going for a walk. I have a lovely doggy, so for me it's about playing with him or stroking him.
Yeah.
So finding some techniques and some kind of go-to methods for pausing that feel comfortable for us, that feel great and work, and we can repeat them. One of the things I've learned about my serenity prayer is it only works if I use it a lot.
Yes.
You know, repetition is good for me when it comes to finding ways to stop.
It's good for everyone, because that's the way our brain works. You know,
Oh,
it reverts to our automatic ways of being because it's efficient. You know, the brain will adopt the most efficient path, and if the most efficient path has always been, well, when I'm rushed and stressed, I shout. That's what it will do every time. It's like a path in the snow. You know, that's the path you take. It's already there. Why trying something else? And so when you try something else like the serenity prayer, you're creating a new path. And to begin with, you've got to take the snow out, you know, you've got to make the path, and it's tricky. But then over time, it becomes your new habitual way. But it only works if you do it regularly, often, and if you committed to it. Otherwise, it will revert back to the way of being. And the same goes for joy. You were talking about seeking joy. You know, you've got to be a joy seeker if you want to have joy in your life. You have to. And you know, if you're in a really difficult place, pausing is or stopping is the way to start. But then, you know, maybe next time you pause and stop, and in that moment just look around and see what is one thing that can give me joy in what I'm seeing or experiencing. And it can be really small. That coffee tastes really nice. You know, it doesn't have to be grand. And I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot when we go, I just want this looming and large sense of happiness and joy. And it's not like that. It's not like that. It's just seeking the joy and the fun and the playfulness in our mundane moments, because that's where it is. You know, it's seeing the cracks.
I completely agree. And for me, joy doesn't have to be expensive.
No.
In fact, joy doesn't have to have any financial cost whatsoever. We can, this sounds ridiculous, but bear with me, listeners. I got joy yesterday by emptying a box that's in the garage that had some of my tut in it, as my best friend calls it. You know, all of the little bits and bobs, bits of jewellery from years ago. And I opened it up, and it was like, oh, I'd forgotten I had that necklace. That's gorgeous. And then one of my necklaces was sterling silver. It was a bit tarnished. And guess what I found in the box? Some silver cleaner. And I was like, oh. And I took a moment and I was like, wow, aren't I lucky that A, I've got this necklace, B, I've actually got the thing to clean it. And I spent a few moments just dipping this necklace, and I just stopped. And I was just in the action of dipping the necklace.
Mm.
And yes, there's 600 other boxes in the garage. Actually, that's an exaggeration. I am prone to exaggeration. There's quite a few. But just doing that one box and having that moment of joy in finding something in that box has kind of inspired me to want to do the other boxes. And for me, joy is about wanting to live, because I've spent lots of years not wanting to live and lots of years feeling sad. I don't want to feel sad anymore. You know, I did not get sober to be boring, stupid, or glum. You know, I want a really rich, joyful life with meaningful experiences and meaningful relationships with other people, but also with myself. And
it's all linked.
Yeah, it is all linked. And I think it's funny. We were, before the show, we were talking about self-commitment. And I made a commitment in that rehab that I wasn't going to drink again, one day at a time. And every day I make a commitment to myself that today is not the day I'm going to have a drink, because today I am sober. And I sometimes forget how big that is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I look at all of the other areas of my life and the other, there's whole industries around personal development and what have you. And I sometimes look at myself and think, I'm not good enough as I am. It's, there's more I should be doing or could be doing, and just shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Yeah.
But this conversation today is kind of reminding me that actually I'm doing okay.
Mm.
I don't have to be perfect at this.
No. Nobody
And
is.
no, but I love that analogy of creating a new path in the snow.
Mm.
And I think I did that when I made that decision to stop smoking. And I've got lots of little different offshoots of paths for all sorts of things in my life. But
and you know what you're describing with the moment where you were dropping your necklace in the solution to make it nice and shiny is you know, you chose to find joy in doing that. You know, you really experienced it, and you chose to notice and to go, oh, am I not lucky? And I think that's really important. It's making that choice. And talking about the brain, since we're on the path about brains and neural pathways, and Rick Hansen, who's an author and a psychologist, talks about the concept of taking in the good. And the analogy he uses is that the brain is like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. So it's a great analogy, which means, you know, when we experience something negative, and that means different things to different people. It might just be someone cutting you off on the road, you know, and you go, oh my God, this always happens to me. We're taking it straight away. It's like absorbed within our brain. But when we experience something positive, like, oh, I've just found this necklace I haven't seen in years, we just tend to dismiss it, and it doesn't print itself off in our brain in the same way. We don't take it in the same way. So over time we tip towards the negativity rather than the joy and the positivity, because even at equal number of positive and less positive moments, we suck in the negative and we just resist the positive. So what he's suggesting is to take a pause, to stop when you experience something positive and just bask in it for 30 seconds, because that will be long enough for your brain to really take it in. And then you're starting to tip the balance of the negative towards the positive and create that reservoir of resourcefulness and positivity that you can tap into. But again, if you rush past, oh, here's a necklace, who cares? I've got 600 other boxes. You can't do any of those things, you know, so you've got to stop and notice and go, wow, the necklace, oh, I'm so happy. I'm just, you know, I'm really happy. And then you dip it in the solutions and you still feel that glow of, oh, that's a great little insignificant but wonderful moment.
And it's all lovely and shiny as well. So
yeah.
you know, it's like I'm like
I can't
a
say
magpie.
you're not wearing it, but I'll take your word. Oh,
No, I'm not yet,
today.
but I do plan to have it on later.
But yeah, so you've got to pause to take in the good too, and just start bringing more joy in rather than you know, being drawn to the negative, which is the easy path.
Okay, so as we are coming up for Christmas, let's talk about the elephant in the room. So one of the things I personally struggle with is Christmas and the lead up to Christmas. We were joking earlier about being our children's PA, particularly when they're in primary school, because of all of the commitments you've got. But for me, Christmas is a particularly sad time of year. It's the anniversary of ultimately my dad leaving this world. And I find it incredibly sad because he's not here to celebrate Christmas with us. And, you know, I would want my parents to be with me forever. I know that's not how life works, but I find it very difficult. And not everybody enjoys Christmas, and, you know, the Christmas adverts are all out. There's lots of food on the table. There's people opening presents. There's moments of joy, and Christmas is all supposed to be about joy. But when you've spent lots of Christmases ruining it by drunken behaviour, by arguments, and ultimately cause sadness, it's not always joyful. So how can you help women like me, and perhaps some of our, you know, our listener, you know, if they've had any experience of really not looking forward to Christmas and wanting to have a different Christmas this year to previous years, internally, not the external stuff, not the presents, not the trees, not the glorious food on the table, but how they feel about
Mm-hmm.
Christmas coming. How can you help and support them, Isabelle?
Well, so one of the methods that I've trained in is called the unstuck method, and it's quite telling because it helps us to get unstuck. And that works really well when we are faced with these difficult emotions. It's all about learning to be with these emotions in a safe way, in a safe container, being heard and supported by someone, and then getting unstuck from all of them, because for as long as we leave them within us, they're going to come back again and again and again. So it's learning to be with these emotions safely, and often posing is a great way to start, again, just to be with that emotion. And then it's often working with someone to unpeel the layers of what's sitting underneath, and trying to shift your perspective so that Christmas isn't as painful, these emotions aren't as painful and tainted in sadness, but to sort of reframe them in a way that's more supportive and helpful, and choosing, as you said before, the joy rather than the sadness, because we can find sadness and difficulty anywhere we look. So I'm just now working with a small number of women between now and Christmas, offering a 2-hour intensive session just to work on these things, because I recognize that a lot of us find Christmas very anxious. We might, it might be our first Christmas without a partner, or perhaps without our children after a separation. Perhaps we have difficulties with a family member, and just the thought of being with them causes all sorts of anxiety. There's so many reasons why we find this period of the year difficult. So yes, I usually work with people on a long period of time, so it's sort of 6 weeks to 6 months, but because of the nature of Christmas and the anxiety and the difficulty that it causes, I'm just working now with a few women on a very short 2-hour intensive session to help them to resource themselves for that period of time, and then we have a follow-up in January just to wrap up the Christmas time and just look at the year ahead. So if anyone is in that state, if anyone is interested, then yes, I still have a few places available to work with me on in that way, which I don't do very often. So
excellent. So can we put a link in the show notes,
yes,
so that if anyone listening is like, oh, I want to spend some hour, I don't want to rock in my chair literally at Christmas time, I'd love to have your support, Isabelle.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll put the link in the show notes, so if you would like to speak with Isabelle, by all means do. And of course, the new year's coming. New year, I blinking well hate this. New year, new start, new you. Must lose 3 stone. I know I'm on a mission to lose 3 stone, folks. I haven't forgotten that I talked to the lovely Catherine Hickman in episode 1 about me needing to lose 3 stone. But the new year is just the madness time, isn't it? So you mentioned that there's also opportunity for people to work with you on a longer term basis, because I don't know about anyone else, but it took 47 years to get my brain and my emotions as they are today. It takes quite a bit of unpicking. There's no miracle cure for this woman.
No.
If someone did want to, perhaps once the madness and the maelstrom of Christmas is out of the way, work with you on a longer term basis, are there opportunities to do that as well?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about self-trust earlier, and the sort of path that I take women, the journey that I take women through, and I'll be offering that program in the new year. So it's a 6-month program with 12 sessions with me, where we really work on, knowing yourself deeply, as you said, unpicking all of the things that are holding you back that you might not even be conscious of, developing a greater emotional resilience, learning to accept ourselves just as we are, with or without 3 stones, and and then feel resourced to live the life we really desire to live, to be a bit bolder in our life, to take the leap, to make that bold decision. I always, I mean, that's not what the program is called, but I always like to think of New Year Be You. And actually, I think I have a podcast episode on that from last year. I think we don't have to be a new us. We just have to be who we are. And often all that's happened is that we wrapped ourselves in layers of stuff over years of living. And we just need to find ourselves again. You know, we just need to rediscover who we are and what we want and what our desires are and what we want out of life. And then we can move forward with that clarity. So, yes, so from January, I'll be working with, again, a small number of women on 6-month basis to really go through that process and help them to have the clarity and the trust in themselves to live the way they wish to live.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure that your website, lightupandthrive.com, is in the show notes so that people can join you. Isabelle, do you know what? I've loved having you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming. And I loved what you mentioned something earlier about seeking joy. And I'm like, yes, I'm all about seeking the joy, because, you know, it's really easy to look for the bad stuff. I think it's much healthier to look for the good stuff. And I love the fact that you're helping women connect with themselves and build that self-trust. If you haven't listened to Isabelle's podcast, please do. It's fabulous. She's got so many episodes. And there's one about inner critics that I'm really looking to dive into. But Isabelle, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Liz.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I've absolutely loved our conversation.
It was great. Thank you very much for having me.
You're more than welcome. God bless. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Today I Am Sober podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love your feedback. So come and find me on social media. All of the links are in the show notes. Until next time. Bye.